You know, for centuries, there's been this one single question right at the heart of how we run our world. It's a massive conflict of ideas that's built empires, it's sparked revolutions, and believe me, it continues to shape every single one of our lives. So let's dive into that great economic debate. Should markets be left alone, or does the government need to step in?
Let's think of it like this. Is the economy kind of like a perfectly engineered self-driving car that just runs best when you leave it alone, always correcting its own course? Or is it more like this incredibly complex vehicle that, without a steady hand on the steering wheel, is pretty much guaranteed to crash? That's the core question we're going to unpack here.
All right, so our journey starts way back in the 18th century with the guy they call the father of modern economics, Adam Smith. Now, this was a time of huge political and technological change, and he came along with this truly revolutionary idea that the most powerful force for social good wasn't a king or a parliament, but something way more subtle. This famous quote, man, it gets right to the heart of his entire philosophy. Smith basically said, look, when you go to buy bread, the baker isn't selling it to you because he's a nice guy and wants you to be happy. Nope. He's doing it to make a living, to look out for his own self-interest. And yet, almost by magic, in doing that, he provides you with your dinner.
And this whole phenomenon is what Smith famously called the invisible hand. It's this wild idea that millions of people, all making their own little self-interested decisions, can somehow create a well-functioning, prosperous society, all without some central planner telling everybody what to do. The market basically regulates itself. So, how does this actually work? Well, Smith built his theory on a few key pillars. First, he saw incredible power in the division of labor. Like, instead of one person making a whole pin, if you break it down into tiny, simple tasks, production just explodes. He was also a huge champion of free trade, arguing that everyone wins when countries just specialize in what they do best. And he believed all of this would naturally lead to a stable economic equilibrium.
But as the Industrial Revolution got going, not everyone was seeing this new capitalist world as some kind of paradise. I mean, the same factories that created all this efficiency also created brutal working conditions and massive inequality. A really powerful, radical critique was brewing, one that was going to challenge Smith's vision at its very core. And this slide just lays it out perfectly. We're talking about two completely opposite ways of looking at the world. Where Smith saw individuals just trying to better their own lives, Karl Marx saw a giant struggle between economic classes. Where Smith saw the benefits of private property, Marx saw the root of all exploitation and argued for collective ownership. And you have to understand, Marx wasn't just some academic. He was a revolutionary. He saw the free market not as a path to prosperity for everybody, but as a system designed from the ground up to enrich the owners, the bourgeoisie, at the expense of the workers, the proletariat. His call to action wasn't to tweak the system, it was to tear it all down. Okay, so a really critical piece of Marx's argument is this thing called the labor theory of value. He argued that the real value of a product, say a wooden chair, isn't about supply and demand. No, it's determined by the total amount of congealed human labor that went into making it. All the hours, the effort, the skill, that's what creates value. And for Marx, profit was basically just the stolen value of a worker's labor. And this really highlights the human side of his critique. Remember that division of labor that Adam Smith celebrated for being so efficient? Well, Marx saw it as a source of profound alienation. He argued it turned human beings into cogs in a machine, just doing the same mindless, repetitive tasks over and over again, stripping them of their creativity and their humanity. For decades, this whole debate was mostly theoretical. But then, in the 1930s, a real-world catastrophe just blew the whole thing wide open. The global economy didn't just stumble, it completely collapsed. And that invisible hand, well, it seemed to have vanished into thin air.
Just look at that number, 13 million. By 1932, that's how many Americans were out of work. The system had failed on a truly catastrophic scale. All the people who believed markets would just self-correct, they had no answer. The world was desperate for a new idea.
And that new idea came from a British economist named John Maynard Keynes. He made what was then a revolutionary argument. When the economy is in a total free fall, waiting around for the invisible hand to fix things is just not an option. He insisted that the government must step in, grab the steering wheel, and actively manage the economy back to health. The logic of Keynesian economics is actually pretty straightforward. See, when a crisis hits, people stop spending. That means businesses fail, which means more people lose their jobs, and the whole thing just spirals downwards. Keynes said the government can break that cycle. By spending money building roads, bridges, you name it, it creates jobs. Those workers now have money to spend, which boosts demand, which revives private businesses, and boom, you've jump-started the whole economic engine. So Keynes's ideas pretty much dominated economic policy for decades after World War II. But the pendulum of ideas always swings. By the 1970s, a new set of problems, things like high inflation and stagnant growth, they called it stagflation, led a lot of people to question if government was really the answer after all. This opened the door for a powerful intellectual counter-revolution, led by thinkers like Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman. Hayek argued that this Keynesian-style government planning wasn't just inefficient. He called it a slippery slope to tyranny that would crush individual liberty. Friedman, on the other hand, he focused on a different lever, saying governments should stop trying to manage spending and just focus on controlling the supply of money. And all of this led to a really simple, really powerful slogan that came to define an entire era of politics in the 1980s. The argument had completely flipped. After decades of everyone basically agreeing with Keynes, the free market champions were back, and they were arguing that government regulations, taxes, and spending were the very things holding the economy back. So, that brings us to today. After all these huge intellectual battles, you'd think we'd have a clear winner by now. But the reality is, the debate is more alive and honestly more complicated than ever before. We are still searching for that perfect balance. I mean, this timeline just shows you how messy the real world is. Every single time one theory seems to be on top, a new crisis comes along to challenge it. The stagflation of the 70s really hurt Keynesian ideas. Then the dot-com bust of the 90s made people question if markets were really so rational. And then, of course, the 2008 financial crisis forced even the most free market governments to step in with massive bailouts, a totally Keynesian move. And this chart right here really illustrates the modern reality. Whether you argue for more government or less, the simple fact is it's a massive player in every modern economy. In most rich countries, the government accounts for anywhere from 30 to 50% of all economic spending. The idea of some pure, hands-off, laissez-faire economy, it just doesn't exist anymore. The real debate is about degrees. And today, the stakes are just incredibly high. When we debate how to handle a global pandemic, or a financial meltdown, or the enormous threat of climate change, what we're really doing is relitigating the same fundamental question that Smith, Marx, and Keynes all wrestled with. What is the proper role of government in our economy? And that leads us to the final critical question. The pendulum has swung from free markets to government intervention and all the way back again. We've seen the strengths and, the devastating failures of both extremes. So as we stare down the challenges of the 21st century, what lessons should we be carrying forward? Where do we go from here? Perhaps the best takeaway comes from the economist Joan Robinson. Understanding this great debate isn't about picking a side and declaring victory. It's about arming yourself with the knowledge to think critically, to question the easy answers, and to avoid being deceived by anyone who claims they have the one perfect solution. The debate continues, and now you're a more informed part of it.